Nations Trust Bank Private Banking is the epitome of elite banking. With its exclusive privileges devoted to providing just the right balance between financial success and lifestyle, our private banking members richly deserve. A financial solution dedicated to excellence, with an unparalleled array of products and services that enrich, enhance, and empower success. A financial solution focused on wealth creation, lifestyle, and the establishment of legacy. A legacy of priority, a legacy of abundance, a legacy much desired. Creating a legacy that's timeless.
Good evening. I have to absolutely say it's an amazing privilege to be able to invite Professor Devaka and Dr. Sriyani, who have both been very involved with WNPS and still serve on one or two committees of ours. So thank you. I'd like to first give a quick brief of Dr. Sriyani. Dr. Sriyani Miththapala is a graduate in biology from the University of Colombo in Sri Lanka and obtained a master's in biology from Smith College in the US and her PhD in wildlife range sciences from the University of Florida. She has been a visiting lecturer in the University of Colombo and Sri Jayawardenepura and was the principal of Ladies College, Colombo. A former Smithsonian Research Associate, she's a long-term consultant with IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, and supports work for its headquarters in Washington, the Sri Lanka Country Office, and formerly the Asian Regional Office. She uses the strength of her technical knowledge to simplify and present complex material to non-biologists. She is a commissioned member of the IUCN's Commission of Ecosystem Management Commission on Education and Communication. Dr. Sriyani also serves for WNPS on our CAT subcommittee in terms of being a key mentor that Professor Inoka and the rest of the CAT committee also rely on. Professor Devaka really comes from a good school. So he graduated from the University of Colombo in 1985 and with a major in zoology. He joined the Department of Zoology of the University of Colombo in 1986, received a Fulbright scholarship in 1989 to Illinois State University in the US, where he obtained his master's or his MSc and PhD. And in 1995, he returned to the University of Colombo, where he currently holds the post of senior professor. His main research interest is the conservation of threatened species, especially the Asian elephant in Sri Lanka. He also serves as the chief technical advisor on the fauna for the Red Listing Program of Sri Lanka from 1996 to date. He is also a technical advisor to the Ministry of Environment on the conservation of threatened species. Devaka has also served as a consultant on biodiversity to IUCN's Asian Regional Office, as well as the IUCN Sri Lanka. He's a member of the Asian Elephant Specialist Group. He's a member of the Asian Specialist Group. These two speakers have over six decades of combined experience in biodiversity conservation between them. Dr. Miththapala and Professor Weerakoon were part of a global team that provided the course content for the e-learning course titled Ecosystem-Based Adaptation, Working with Nature to Adapt to a Changing Climate. At this stage, I would welcome both of them to start the presentation of theirs, and thank you very much.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Please excuse me for sitting down and talking. And if you can't hear me, let me know. President, WNPS, the committee, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for having us here today. Okay. Thank you for having us here today. It is indeed a pleasure. For several of you who have come here today because you love wildlife and you want to see beautiful pictures of plants and animals, and even leopards, which I usually sneak into every presentation I give. We are sorry, but we will be very thin on species pictures today. We won't be focusing on species. So please don't start hurling things at us. So let me say at the outset that nothing we say here today is rocket science. Some of what we will present is ancient knowledge. And what we will present are simple approaches for a win-win situation for both humans and biodiversity. By helping people to address issues of climate change using biodiversity, we help improve people's lives and enhance biodiversity. So my section of this talk will be centered on 3 topics: a brief overview of global warming and climate change, introducing nature-based solutions, and then going deeper into some of those nature-based solutions: ecosystem-based adaptation, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, and ecosystem-based mitigation. So let's go straight into the first section. Okay, what happened there? PowerPoint is unstable. Sorry, excuse me. Video? Yeah. This one. Okay. Okay, just wait here for the few minutes. Not opening. So without any doubt now, our human activities, the greenhouse gas concentrations have increased, and that has caused global surface temperatures. I'm sorry, this is not opening within the presentation. Yeah. Okay. Global surface temperatures have increased. Nothing showing up there. Is it okay? Okay. And have increased faster since 1970 than any other time in the last 2 centuries. And because of this global warming, sorry, I'm so sorry. I want to go back to this after this. Okay, right. Because of the global warming, the Earth's climate systems have changed, and this change is called, that's fine. No, one before. No. Okay, climate change. And the UN has called climate change the defining issue of our time. So let's look at what happens when you have a warmer ambient temperature. Firstly, you get dangerous heat waves. In 2022, 16,000 people died in Europe because of heat waves. This year, in the summer, in the US, when elderly people went out into the open, into the cities, and if they fell down, the first thing that had to be done was they had to be treated for burns because the pavements were so hot. So that's the first thing that happens. And the second, on the other hand, ecosystems in polar regions, species in polar regions, mountains have enormous problems with the changing temperature, increasing temperature. Another thing that happens is that with the warming world, the oceans were warm. And with this comes a cascade of events, like, for example, loss of marine biodiversity, loss of coral reefs through bleaching, seagrass meadows, and then you have wave currents that change because of the warmth. And this can lead to areas where there are no oxygen in the sea, and then, of course, enormous changes in food webs because some species can't survive, some species will. So there are profound changes in marine food webs, and it will affect our food security, as well as affecting all the species compositions in the sea. The other thing that happens is what we know, glaciers are melting. Usually, white ice reflects the sun back into space, right? So there's no warming there. But the moment the oceans warm and the darker sea appears or the land appears, more heat gets absorbed into the water. And then you have more warming, more melting of ice, a positive feedback loop going on there. And with the melting of ice, of course, there's sea level rise. And with sea level rise, there's coastal flooding, salt water going up rivers, people getting displaced, changes in species, lack of fresh water, food security problems, a whole gamut of issues. Then, of course, as we mentioned earlier, with global warming, you have climate change. And the most obvious manifestation of climate change is that we have far more intense, frequent, extreme weather events, like storms, storm surges, cyclones, droughts. And when you have things like intense rain and floods, you have erosion leading to other disasters like landslides. And then there are changes in weather patterns, like very intense rain, suddenly erratic rain, changes in seasons, how the seasons start, how the seasons end. It's not like those days now, we can't predict our monsoons. And this has enormous bearing on agriculture. So often there are failure of crops, and this affects food security. And the warming oceans drive rainfall, extreme rainfall, and cyclones. So all these cycles are going around. And so now let's take a brief look at what happened in 2020 globally. Nearly 400 reported disasters, over 30,000 deaths, 150 million people affected, nearly 225 billion US dollars in economic damage. And look where most of the disasters took place, in our neck of the woods. So now let's quickly look at Sri Lanka. You have the wet zone, intermediate zone, and dry zone. And the data show that there is increasing mean temperature, and it's highest in Nuwara. The southwest monsoons bring their rains, and invariably it floods in the western and southern provinces. We saw that last month in Matara. The northeast monsoons bring their rains and floods the north, central, and eastern provinces. And sea level rise, storm surges, and coastal erosion is worst in this southwestern belt of Sri Lanka, where 1/3 of Sri Lanka's population lives. Okay? And this is not all. The 2050 plan for Sri Lanka is that there will, by the National Physical Planning Division, is that there will be clusters of urban areas all over the coast like this. So I then took 5 years from 2015 to 2020 and got a timeline of what happened in those 5 years in Sri Lanka. Drought in 2016, the worst drought in 4 decades. 2017, floods and landslides, worst disaster since the 2004 tsunami. 2018, floods and landslides in 24 out of 25 districts. 2019, floods and landslides island-wide. Drought 2020, 14 districts. Cyclone and flooding 2020. So it's a very simple picture here. We have droughts, floods, and landslides. Okay? So, in a nutshell, our immediate problem in Sri Lanka is we have either too much rainfall or too little. Right? So, I'm going to now take some time and sort of hammer home some points before going on to the next section. As I said, we have either too much water, too much rain, or too little rain. And this is all related to the water cycle. So I'm going to look at the water, show you the water cycle briefly. All of you know this. It rains, the water seeps into the soil, groundwater is recharged. Meanwhile, water runs off as surface runoff into the rivers and oceans. And this surface runoff is the greatest force of natural erosion. It carries all the silt into the rivers, right? And meanwhile, the heat of the sun is evaporating water from water bodies, and green plants release water vapor through their leaves, through transpiration. And when this water vapor condenses into water, it rains again. So this is what Professor Devaka will talk about later. Okay, this is the water cycle. Then I want to bring up another slide that shows you other damages we are causing in addition to climate change, which also feed into the problems. One is that we have these ecosystems and the services they provide us, the benefits they provide us, and you have threats to biodiversity. We all know this: habitat loss and fragmentation, overexploitation, pollution, invasive alien species. And these threats drive changes in ecosystems. They cause changes in ecosystem functioning. And that damages ecosystem services. It affects human well-being. It increases our vulnerability. It affects our security, affects our health, it affects our livelihoods. Meanwhile, there's this biggie, climate change, which is an overarching threat. It worsens all other threats. For example, we all know about invasive alien species. They're invasive because they're hardy. They can cope with changing environmental conditions. So when it warms, invasive alien species can spread, our native species can't. So there's a push from the climate change towards this other threat. Then, of course, climate change has a huge impact on natural hazards and turning them into disasters. They magnify existing risks, they create new risks, and they make hazards into disasters that are more frequent, more intense. Meanwhile, many of the threats we discuss make these disasters worse. For example, if you cut the trees in a catchment area, upland in a catchment area, it will worsen floods downstreams, right? In fact, there was a news item recently from the NRBO which said that National Building NBRO, which said that because of deforestation and intense rainfall, landslides have increased to the extent that 1/5 of Sri Lanka's lands are prone to landslides now. So many threats, existing threats, worsen hazards. Meanwhile, many disasters worsen threats. Hold that thought for a minute. I'll come back to that. One final animation here. And when you have disasters crashing into, storms crashing into mangroves and coastal areas, they destroy can destroy part of the ecosystem itself. So, as I said, disasters can worsen existing threats. This is a classic example of what happened after the 2004 tsunami. The waters went into Boondala, and in Boondala, there was this prickly pear or katupatok or nahakalli growing, spreading as an invasive. And when the water receded, it took with it parts of these plants, and these plants started growing where they never grew before on the beach. And you can see behind I don't have a pointer. Do you have a pointer? This one. Let's see, what do I do? I should point to the goat foot behind. Right, behind there's goat's foot there. It's replacing the native vegetation of the beach. Then I just want to remind you that anything that emits greenhouse gases is called a carbon source, and anything and plants that absorb carbon dioxide are called carbon sinks. There are two ways of dealing with climate change. One is critical, that is taking actions to reduce emissions. That has to be done. And that takes the form of using clean energy or energy efficiency. You want to reduce carbon sources or enhance carbon sinks. The other one is to accept that, okay, this is happening, and even if today all greenhouse gases magically stop, the earth will still need thousands of years to cool down. So we need a parallel approach, and that is climate change adaptation, accepting that it is here, and what can we do to adjust to actual and expected climate change effects. So now let me introduce nature-based solutions. This simply means that we work with nature to address challenges of communities, and as I said before, to provide benefits to both humans and to biodiversity. And one of the nicest examples I've come across is about the floating plots of Bangladesh. As you know, two-thirds of Bangladesh is a huge floodplain and a wetland, and every time the monsoons come, it's flooded. Most of it is flooded for months of the year. So cultivation becomes very difficult. So traditionally, farmers used to take floating plants like water hyacinth, weave them into mats, seed those mats with their vegetables, and let the rains come and let these rafts float away. And then they simply use a stick or a kekka to bring the food back to them. Now it's being touted as an excellent method of climate change adaptation. It has been around for a long time. Professor Devaka will talk more about something closer to home. Nature-based, excuse me. Nature-based solutions, there are several approaches: ecosystem-based adaptation, ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, ecosystem-based mitigation, ecological engineering, natural infrastructure, green and blue infrastructure, and they all come under this umbrella approach of nature-based solutions. We are going to home in on these three because this deals with climate change adaptation, this deals with disaster risk reduction, and this deals with climate change mitigation. So finally, let me go through each of them. Ecosystem-based adaptation, or EBA, is the use of biodiversity and ecosystems to help people adapt to climate change. You know that heat islands, cities generate more heat than rural areas. And this is a picture from Singapore, where greenery and water features are all part of the city in an integrated way, so that you not only cool the area for the citizens, but you make sure that the floods there is enough wetlands for the floods to be absorbed. Okay, let's make it more livable for them. Eco-DRR, or this ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, is to use ecosystems sustainably, conserve them, restore them, to reduce disaster risk. And mitigation is to obviously increase carbon sinks. All three of these approaches help people make use of biodiversity, address climate change impacts, And that is the core of when you talk about nature-based solutions, that always comes along. All these three parts of the pie come together. Right. Now I'm going to quickly go through some differences between hard engineering and nature-based solutions. Now, if I set out to do some ecological mangrove restoration in order to provide physical protection from coastal flooding, so I'm setting out to do an eco-DRR action here. What will happen is that the moment I start doing that, in a little while, the fish stocks will improve, right? So it will start improving food security for people. Therefore, people will be more, there'll be more support for fisheries-based livelihoods, automatically enhances species richness, and it provides recreational and tourism benefits. So we started to provide physical protection, but we ended up with a whole lot of additional benefits, co-benefits. In contrast, if you erect a gabion retaining wall to prevent erosion, you will prevent erosion, you will have clearer water, but no other benefit. Then, nature-based solutions are cost-effective. This is a picture from Nepal, where the local government, when given authority, started cutting roads into the mountains with no protection, enormous erosion losses, and landslides. And all IUCN Nepal did at that point was get a few bioengineers together to find out which was the best grass to grow, to hold down the soil, grow fast, and provide other benefits to the community. And they grew this verge of grass, that's all. And it reduced erosion and landslides considerably. And this grass grows to about 2 meters. So every once in a while, it can be cut and sold as income. So when a cost-benefit analysis was done using a standard calculation, you found that over time, the red is the hard engineering, the cost increased because you had to maintain hard engineering structures where you don't have to maintain the green solutions. But when you factored in the core benefits, increased income to the people, etc., you found that nature-based solutions were much, much more cost-effective. And the last point I want to make is that we've had endless discussions about this. So saying, is this eco-DRR or is this EBA? Is this ecosystem-based adaptation or disaster risk reduction? Because there's a huge amount of overlap when you talk of nature-based solution. In that example I showed you, if you restore mangroves, you're increasing mitigation, you're increasing carbon sinks by growing plants there, right? Then by improving livelihoods, you're supporting ecosystem-based adaptation. Anytime you restore anything, you end up with ecosystem-based, you end up increasing carbon stock sinks, right? In contrast, if you have a solar panel, all it will do is it will reduce your use of fossil fuels. No other benefit, right? No overlap at all. So with that, I made it. Over to Professor Devaka.
Thank you, Stanley.
He needs that removal.
So I'm going to start where Sriyani left off. As she pointed out, climate change presents many challenges, and we have two strategies, but one is mitigation and other is adaptation. And we have two approaches, either hard solutions or nature-based solutions. And she also went on to say we have co-benefits, we have initial investment may be high, but maintenance cost is low, and with the co-benefits is more cost effective, and we can achieve both adaptation and mitigation at the same time. So basically, if you look at climate change, it has slow long-term changes such as elevated temperature, which may take over a time horizon of maybe 50, 60, 100 years. And it also leads to sea level rise, again, taking place over a long time horizon, acidification of oceans. All this will have serious impacts, but the rapid short-term changes are the changes in weather patterns, which leads to intense rain within a short window of time, which we just came off such a situation, and then prolonged dry periods. So we run into this series of floods, droughts, and I'm again putting Sriyani's strides to reiterate the fact. So basically, when we are looking at responding to this, again, we can have nature-based approaches, but before I go into that, I would like to take a few minutes to try and explain to you what a flood is all about. So the flood is basically a mismatch between inflows and outflows. Because if you look at the series of pictures up on the top of the slide, you can see water comes into the river, which is the inflow, and the river carries water away, which is the outflow. And if the inflows are less than the outflows, the river level drops. And then when it starts raining, the inflows will increase. And if the inflows increase over the outflow, the river level continues to go up until it just floods over the river banks. And that's when we are having a flood. And that is what is happening at any given part of the river. But at the river mouth, as the river comes down, it starts very as a small stream, and as it comes down, stream networks connect together, form rivulets. Rivulets come together and form the river, so the volume of water carried will increase from the top of the mountain range when it comes to the coastline. So at the coastline, all this water that is draining from the river must go into the ocean through the river mouth. So there is water arriving at the river mouth and water leaving the river mouth. Again, an inflow-outflow situation. And if there is more water coming than water leaving, water begins to accumulate at the river mouth. It slowly starts expanding, and it first floods the floodplain. And if there is more, then it's going to spill over to other areas, causing a flood. Depending on the amount of rain, the magnitude of the flood may change. Now, if we are going to influence droughts and floods, what we have to do is play around with these inflows and outflows. Now you are seeing two sets of pictures. On the set of pictures on the left-hand side, or my left hand or your right-hand side, shows a mountain that is devoid of trees. On the other side, you can see slopy land with trees. So without trees, when the water falls in, the rainwater can move in three ways. The rainwater that falls on the ground will run on the surface of the ground, which is called the surface runoff. Some will penetrate a little deeper and run underneath the soil, which is the subsurface runoff. Others will penetrate deeper into the land and recharge the groundwater. Now, if there are no trees, the water that falls on the ground runs very fast, leaving very little time for infiltration. So there's a lot of water being carried out or as surface runoff. And since rainfall drops on the ground, it dislodges the soil, so it carries the soil with it, and it's going to bring lots of water within a short period of time and great deal of sediment. If you look at the bottom picture, what happens is the sediment will deposit on the riverbed and it decreases the capacity of the river, so it floods much faster. On the other side, you can see if there are trees, it will slow down the movement of water because the roots and the dead leaves, etc., on the ground of vegetation slows down the movement of water, prevents erosion, giving enough time for the water to infiltrate into the ground, so less water is carried to the river. So what we are doing with trees is we are reducing the inflow and we are allowing water to penetrate into the ground. So when the groundwater is replenished, it can continue to provide water to the river, so the rivers don't run dry. It can maintain flow over a longer period of time. So flood and drought is about how much water comes to the river. Is it coming fast and it's going to run down and create floods, and then when the rain is over, the rivers are going to dry out? Or if you have the scenario on the right side, you will see there will be a lot of groundwater recharge, so there is plenty of supply to the river over a longer period of time, even during the dry season. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 4 examples of how we can bring nature-based solutions in real life, very simple solutions. And I will try to give some examples as well from Sri Lanka. And when you talk about solutions, we are always used to think only on locationally. Now, I live in Panipitiya, so therefore most of my life revolves around that. But what we must also understand that we live in a landscape. What happens out there further up will affect us. If there's going to be rain in Kalaniganga, maybe around Lakshapana, there can be floods in Colombo and I can be affected. So we are living in a connected landscape. Although we are living in one place, we must try to think at a landscape level if we want to bring feasible solutions. So I'm showing you a map of Sri Lanka. We are a small island, but we are dissected by 103 river basins. And the river basins define the landscapes in Sri Lanka because river basin connects the land from ridge to all the way to reef. So there can be deforestation in the mountain region, which will increase the sediment flow. The sediment will deposit in offshore coral reefs, and a coral reef that is located hundreds of kilometers away from where the deforestation occurs will suffocate and die, because this is what landscapes do. They connect things. Good things will have positive impacts, bad things will have negative impacts much far away from where we are doing it. So this is why we have to start thinking at a landscape level, because if we want to bring effective solutions, we have to bring solutions at a landscape level. So what I'm going to show you, if you take a river, you can divide it into 3 parts. The upper part, which is the upper sub-basin, then the middle sub-basin, and then the lower sub-basin, and then the interface between the land and the ocean. So I will take 4 examples from these 4 locations and try to show you how we can bring nature-based solutions to help our problem. So if you are looking at upland areas, the best way to deal with the best nature-based solution is catchment forest restoration or reforestation in the mountain area. Because like I pointed out earlier, if you restore the mountain area, the trees will function as an interceptor. It will intercept rain and fog. It will reduce soil erosion. It absorbs the water, allows groundwater recharge, slows down the movement of water into the river, filter pollutants. It gives you all these services which we refer to as ecosystem services. And once you take the trees out, it takes away all these services, and therefore at mountain, in the mountain region, the best nature-based solution we can look for is restoring and or reforesting areas that are abandoned in the mountain region. So we bring a lot of resilience in our river basins, because majority of the river basins are starting in the mountain region. And if you move to the middle sub-basin, the example I've taken is the tank ecosystem. This is, of course, an engineering solution, a man-made tank. We don't have natural tanks in Sri Lanka. They're all man-made. And our, I think when Sriani talked about solutions, she said there are solutions like the Bangladeshi solution. Traditionally, people have dealt with climate erratic events. So climate change is not a new thing. And therefore, when you are looking for solutions, it's always good for us to look at how traditionally we have dealt with it, because we can learn lessons from it. And this is how we have traditionally dealt with climate uncertainty. Tanks were developed by our ancestors to deal with the climate uncertainty in the dry zone, because when you look at the dry zone, much of the rain is received during the northeastern monsoon, which lasts from about November to January or mid-February, and after that comes a prolonged dry season. So the dry zone is designed in a way it receives a lot of rain during a short window and long dry period. So classic situation for a flood drought cycle. But if you look at the tank, what it does is it captures water and stores it. And tanks are not built alone. They are built as cascades, as you can see in the other picture. So the water in the upper tanks will fill first, and then it will overflow, and then it will be captured by tanks that are located a little further down, and then when the last tank overflows, only water flows into the river. And how does it affect flood and drought? Because if you look at a river basin, it's made out of small rivulets, which are called sub-basins. So the flow in the river is defined by water that is coming from the rivulets. But when you have a series of tanks trapping the water, the inflows by the rivulets to the main river reduces. And therefore, inflows at the river mouth also reduces, which reduces floods. And at the same time, the water is retained by these tanks for a longer period of time and releases it slowly. So during the dry period, you do not have to experience drought. So if you look at the traditional village tanks of Sri Lanka, which dates back to about 300 BC, and our hydraulic civilization lasted till about 1200 AD. So for about 1500 years, what our ancestors have done is created this thing called the tank, which is an engineering solution. But why I am using it as a nature-based solution is because they have built-in components into this, which makes it a nature-based solution. Because if you look at the tank, it's not just a water-holding body. It has a number of attributes which make it a fantastic system. Because if you look at the water in the tank, it's defined by water flows into the tank, water flowing out of the tank for agriculture, water seeping into the ground, and water evaporation. So these four aspects will control the amount of water. If you look at evaporation, evaporation is driven by winds. So they have grown trees on the catchment, and they have also grown trees below the dam, which is called the Kattakadu or the interceptor. So what these two trees do is they function as a wind belt and slows down the winds and reduces the evaporative losses from the tank, so the water can be retained longer. But from a biodiversity point of view, if you look at the tank, there are a number of very interesting attributes that have been added onto this, because they had 1500 years to experiment with this system and improve it, and they have improved it immensely. I don't think we can improve it any further. If you look at the properly built traditional tank, has some very, very interesting attributes. So if you look at the catchment, it's called Gascomona, they grow trees on it. So when the water comes into the tank, the trees will capture the sediment and prevent sediment flow into the tank, and therefore it prevents the filling of the tank. If there were no trees, sediments will flow and the tank will fill up, and it will reduce its capacity over time. And then you have the littoral zone, because when at the height of the rains, the tank will fill up and it will spill over. And as we start using the water level recedes and it exposes the tank bed. And because of the moisture, grasses begin to grow on the tank bed. And this is what provides food for the herbivores, especially if you go to main area, Kaudola, when you see the gathering, what you're seeing is this process. The littoral zone of the tank, which we call the drawdown area, provides plenty of food for the large herbivores during the dry season. And then you have the actual tank itself, which is used by a large number of aquatic birds. And if you go to any of our village tanks, you can record so many aquatic birds because it's one of the most important habitats for aquatic birds in the dry zone. Then you have the tank bed, the tank bud or the Weerakoon, and then below the tank bud, you have the interceptor or the Kattakadua, which functions in two ways. One, they will absorb toxicant salinity in the water and prevent salinization of the tank, and at the same time they will intercept the winds. And if you study these components, you will find that the trees they have planted in the Gasgoman are different from the Kattakadua. They have selected these trees very carefully in the Kattakadua for toxin removal, in the catchment for improving the catchment function. So if you look at the tank, that's why I said over a long period of time, they have mastered this system and they've improved it so much. And I'm going to present you some data that was collected by IUC in Sri Lanka in a cascade like this in the Anuradhapura district, Kaparigama cascade system. And I'm just showing you some data about the faunal and floral diversity that was observed in this catchment area. And you can see the number of species recorded. It's very, very high. Lots of endemics, lots of threatened species. And then if we try to look at the data recorded in the different parts, you can see, you look at Gasgomana and Kattakadua, or the catchment and the interceptor, supports very large species assemblages, both flora and fauna. That's why I call this a nature-based solution. Even though it's an engineering solution, they have made it so that it supports biodiversity and it supports people, livelihood, and it also solves the problems. Sriani showed in her presentation, there should be 3 cardinal characters. All 3 can be seen here. So this shows that traditionally we have been thinking about nature-based solutions. Nothing new to us, but it's just that we don't look at it in that light today. Then other nature-based solutions we can do in the middle sub-basin, restoring riverine forest, because riverine forest in Sri Lanka are very sparse because we have used the land right up to the river. In most places you can't see riverine forest in Sri Lanka except in the protected areas like Wasgomua, Udawalawa, or Runa National Park. In Manik Ganga or Mahavali Ganga, you can see some good riverine forest. In fact, if you go to Wasgomua in the riverine forest, you can see red-faced malkoha, which is a rainforest species. Or you can see purple-faced langurs, which are generally restricted to catchments of the tanks and the river basins in the dry zone, even though in the wet zone it's found in most habitats. So the river basin or the riverine habitats in the dry zone are extremely important for biodiversity. And not only that, when you restore the riverine habitats, it also functions as corridors for organisms to move around. Because today we live in a highly fragmented landscape. In this island, 30% of the land is set as natural habitats, 70% is used by people. And we have fragmented our landscape into small patches, and therefore organisms cannot move between these patches. They are becoming isolated, or they try to move and they are creating conflict. But maintaining good riverine habitats help species to move. There's a lot of research to show, give evidence to that aspect. And also the riverine vegetation will trap sediment flow into the river and stabilizes the riverbank. Another thing we can do is agroforestry. because we cannot grow forest all the time. Sometimes we'll have to work with the people, get people to grow things that are also biodiversity friendly, but they can also support themselves, support their livelihoods. And the nice thing about agroforestry is it creates a very complex structure. The classic example is the Candian home gardens, where you have trees forming different layers, a very complex structure which supports very large biodiversity. But at the same time, since you have a variety of different things, you will have a diversification of income. Therefore, if you lose on one crop, you still have another crop. So it enhances livelihoods, it enhances biodiversity. Again, a very good win-win situation. And then if you look at the lower sub-basin, as Sriani pointed out, 1/3 of Sri Lanka's population live in the coastal zone. And if you look at most of our major cities, they are located at the river basin of a major river. Colombo, the river basin of Kalaniganga, Kalutara, Kaluganga, Galle, Ginganga, Matara, Nilwalaganga. So all these major cities in the coastal zone are on the mouth of a river basin, and therefore they are always subjected to flood issues. And what will help us deal with this flood are the wetlands. Wetlands function as a buffer to absorb the initial flood, preventing it from going into the upland and causing damage. So wetlands gives us multiple services. One is resilience against flooding, because like I said, they function as buffers. If you look at the damage caused by the 2016 floods, it comes up to $1.5 billion. You would think that this is some fairy tale number, but if you look at the insurance money paid for, because 2016 flood damaged most of the Biagama, the industrial zone, and massive amount of insurance money had to be paid. And this only captures the money that has been paid for the big organizations. People like small people who are running a little hopper boutique or something, their loss is not included in this calculation. So basically, what these floods do, these wetlands do, is gives us resilience against flooding. But not only that, it will also cool the city, as Sriani pointed out, because one of the biggest issues we are going to face in growing urban landscape is there's a lot of concrete surfacing, there's a lot of heat, and that leads to use of more energy, because you have to use air conditioners, fans to cool you down, which leads to further emission. So it pushes us into a very bad positive feedback loop. So what helps us to keep the cities cooler are the wetlands. It will also trap the pollutants in the water, so keep the water clear. And also it purifies air by trapping dust, removing carbon dioxide, producing oxygen. And it provides, again, places for biodiversity. And if you look at these pictures, you can see a fishing cat, a otter, pelican. All these are things that you can see in Colombo wetlands. We live in an urban city. If you take the case of the spot-billed pelican, about 6 years ago, it was listed as a globally vulnerable species. Some of my friends from Japan visited Sri Lanka. They checked into Cinnamon Lakeside, and he just went out and looked outside the window. There were about 30 pelicans swimming in Beira Lake, a highly polluted water body. And here is a globally threatened animal right in smack in the middle of Colombo city. That's the kind of diversity we still have. And these wetlands are very important to maintain that diversity, and we are losing these wetlands. Over the last few decades, we've lost about 40% of our wetlands, and we continue to lose it. But this is the only thing that will help us to deal with climate change driven floods, and therefore we must think about how can we protect them, how can we restore them. And if you look at most of these wetlands, you'll also find that they have been maintained for a long time as paddy fields by farmers, because wetlands are what we call ephemeral ecosystems. They have very short lifespans, because they as the sediments come in, the wetlands get filled, and then they are slowly converted into woodlots. So what stops them are the farmers, because they prevent the succession in the wetlands. They freeze it in some stage and they keep it in that manner. So if you look at over the what was happening over the last few decades, paddy farming in the cities are becoming quite uneconomic because there are other livelihoods that they have. So people have been moving away from the paddy field and they have abandoned farming. And in most of these places, we see infestation by invasive species like Vellata and converting these wetlands into woodlots and thereby losing its ability to function as flood buffers. And they also create opportunities for recreation. And if you look at these two pictures, I don't know whether anyone of you have been to Baddagana Biodiversity Park or Diasaru in Talawatugoda. If you haven't, you should go and spend a little time. These are beautiful parks right in the middle of the city, and they support lots of biodiversity, and they provide all these other services. Other things we can do in the Lower Sub Basin is things like green walls. You may see some of the buildings like this when you are driving down the Parliament Road, green gardens, urban green spaces, etc. And finally, the land-sea interface is a very, very important region because this is where a lot of ocean-borne threats will affect us, like tsunamis, storm surges, etc. And this is where we need a lot of protection. And what gives us protection are mostly the natural habitats. I think that is what we learned from the tsunami, where there were good natural habitats like mangroves or coral reefs, there was less damage. Sand dunes protected most of the areas inside, but where there were no natural habitats, we have had serious issues. So restoration of these and protection of these coastal habitats are important. The example I'm showing you on the top is mangrove restoration project that the WNPS itself is carrying out at Ane Vilundava. Again, we can restore salt marshes, which are very good at trapping carbon. And then down below, you can see the coral restoration project carried out by Tokyo Cement. So these are things that are happening in the country where people are doing nature-based solutions to some extent, trying to find solutions to the challenges affected by climate change. So basically, if I sum up all what I've said, there are a number of approaches we can have. Most of them depend on restoration of natural ecosystems which are degraded by human activity. And if you, I'm just giving you this picture to show you some cost estimates where what kind of benefits we can achieve by this type of nature-based approaches. I would also like to point out that our ability to climate change depends largely on healthy ecosystems. Now, what you see on the top is that if you look at living organisms, we have a hierarchical system. Starting from atoms, we go all the way from cells, organ systems to man. And beyond man, or beyond individual, you have populations, and then individuals, different species come together and form communities, and they form ecosystems and eventually the planet. So if you look at a person, our health depends on all our systems working well. If one system fails or if one organ doesn't function properly, we become unhealthy. And if we are unhealthy, we cannot perform properly. Likewise, if you look at an ecosystem, it is made out of a number of components like a human being. So if any one of these components are affected, the ecosystem cannot function properly. They cannot provide the services that they can be providing. That is why, as much as human health, we have to be thinking about ecosystem health. Our health depends on a number of criteria like good exercise, eating well, having good behaviors, etc. Whereas when you look at an ecosystem, its health depends on its vigor, how diverse it is, how much production it can do, and how much resilience it has. If we damage it, can it survive on its own? So these are the criteria we are looking at measuring ecosystem health, because these two are connected. Like if I go back to my original example, if you remove trees, if there are trees in the catchment, when there's rain, the river flow is regulated. If you remove the trees, a lot of water comes down, causing flood, Floods leads to various diseases. So if the ecosystem health is deteriorated, its ability to provide services go down. And when the services go down, our health is affected. So if not for any reason, for purely selfish reasons, we have to be thinking about this because our survival depends on this. So most of the nature-based solutions are basically depending on ecological restoration. What I'm showing you here is a natural process that happens on our planet called succession. If you take any piece of land, if you clear it, if you let it be, slowly small herbs come, then shrubs come, eventually trees come, and it will turn into a forest, which is called succession. And if you damage it, you are pushing it back. If you let it be again, it regrows. And just like our health, if you damage it a little bit, we don't have to do much. If you just let it be, it can recover. Like if sometimes we get sick, all what we have to do is just rest. Sometimes you get sick, you have to take medication, you have to do additional stuff. Sometimes you get sick, you have to get hospitalized and get much more treatments. Just the same principles that applies here. If you degrade it a little, just step out and let it be, it will regrow. If it is degraded more, you'll have to do little more. And if it is degraded heavily, then you have to do a lot of work. So basically, in conclusion, what I had to say, nature-based solutions, they take time because trees don't grow rapidly. If I may go back to the example Sriyani shared with you, gabion wall can be put up in a very short time. But if you want to grow mangrove in the same length of seashore, it'll take quite a bit of time, maybe 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and most of the time we don't have the kind of patience to do things like that. And it takes effort. You'll have to work very hard to get it going at first, but once you do it, it takes care of itself. So that's where some of the reluctance to nature-based solutions come from, because it takes time and effort, and also the benefits depend on the scale. Because if you do just 1 hectare or 2 hectare, you will not get a lot of benefits. But the nice thing about nature-based solutions is benefits increase in a exponential manner, not a linear manner. Because if you look at engineering solutions, benefits are linear. Whereas here, because there are so many co-benefits, the larger your intervention, the benefits will increase exponentially. But it needs planning. Restoration is not just going and planting some trees. It's a process. You have to plan it. You have to know what to plant, where to plant, when to plant. So otherwise, you will probably end up doing more harm in the name of nature-based restoration and so on. So with this, I'm going to stop. I would like to thank WNPS on behalf of both Sriyani and me. And I would also like to thank Sriyani. We go back a long way, almost 2 decades, and we have very contrasting styles. She finished her presentation 3 weeks ago. I finished mine at 5:15 today. So I can imagine how frustrating it must be for somebody like Sriyani to put up with me, but she insisted that we do this together. So thank you, Sriyani, for having faith in me to show up on time.
Thank you to Sriyani and Devaka for sharing so much of insight. So let's light this up a little bit. Kick off on a nasty note, because the president left off talking about the best school. So I'm very happy that he's from that school. Devaka is from a good school. And since the president of the country is also from a good school, maybe the two of them can convince the president to move that climate university from Kothmale to that school. And we'll have a better climate in Kothmale and in the school. But jokes apart, Devaka, you spoke a lot about the traditional knowledge we have on the weavers and that whole ecosystem. But really, is it going to be limited to these kind of theories? And are we going to be one of these backward-looking nations which looks back at a huge body of knowledge that we had, takes great pride in it, but we do not see this coming back into mainstream use. So the question I'm going to throw to you, put you on a bit of a spot to get the action going, is do you see signs that Sri Lanka is bringing back these big bodies of knowledge into the big work that is happening in the country, which can hopefully rebalance, versus, let's say, smaller people doing their little things? You're at the center of all of this. I'm putting you in a spot straight away to kind of kick off the evening.
No, actually, I think the answer is yes. The example I showed you, Kaprigama, IUCN did ecosystem-based, nature-based restoration. There are many cascade systems that people are working on today. The problem is, when these cascades were functioning in its heyday, our human population would have been like 200,000 people. So the demand on the land was less, and they could afford to leave some of the tanks for animals. If you look at a cascade system, all the tanks are not used for agriculture. The tanks in the upper area are left for animals, for watering, and only the tanks in the lower part of the catchment are used for agriculture. Today we are 21 million people, and therefore the demand on the land is high. And if you go to most of the tanks in Sri Lanka, the elements that I've showed you cannot see them anymore, because they plant in the catchment, they plant in the interceptor, they plant everywhere. So the tanks today do not provide the services the way they were designed to be. So I think we have to think differently. We have to change the paradigm that we're doing today, because what we have today is what we didn't had 2000 years ago, which is technology. Today we have technology to grow trees with small amount of water. Whereas we are not using technology, we are going for very, very traditional agriculture, which is very land intensive. So we'll have to start a paradigm shift. We can bring these characters back, but then we'll have to change our way of agriculture to make sure that we have enough production for 21 million people in a lesser amount of land.
Dr. Sriani is going to add something that's great.
We hadn't time at all. We hadn't time at all to talk about agriculture, right? Because Devaka spoke a bit about how agroforestry helps. There are a lot more things to do. We took a huge hit with this organic fertilizer issue. So it set us back 10 years, because you can't just drop organic fertilizer. It has to be capacity building over and over before you even start it on a small scale. But there are other things that can be done. They are being done by people like IMI. There are massive projects going where there are things like precision agriculture, where only the amount of water, only the amount of chemicals are needed, that very basic is put. Then nature smart agriculture, climate smart agriculture, simply growing species that are drought tolerant in the dry zone. This is one of my pet peeves. I really can't talk today about it, but I really don't understand why we haven't diversified the entire dry zone yet into drought tolerant species. Those things are being done, but as with everything in our country, it's all at a pilot level.
Thank you, Dr. Sriani. So taking questions, opening remark from me is, please, I get very draconian on these Q&As if people are wanting to talk a lot about what they've done and making long statements. So I will be equally draconian today. Please don't let me do that. Keep your questions short and intellectually stimulating so that we can tap into the panel who's here. Okay, one from there, please. Go ahead, sir.
This is not a question. This is what I've already done. In Kollupitiya, I have grown a forest around my garden. I have got huge number of species there. All I did was to heal the soil, because without a microbiome, you cannot grow anything. We have forgotten about the microbiome. Now, I also have done enough research about the microbiome in my body. Believe it or not, I have not eaten rice for 14 years. I'm 87 years old and I can jump like this. How? I got new hair growing on my head. If we all do this, imagine the dollars we would save. We don't need to eat rice. There are thousands of beautiful plants. They are called medicinal plants. That was our vegetables, not the stuff that was introduced by the British. They are all growing easily. Can you imagine my air conditioners are all gone? Because I have got a forest of cool air blowing through my home. I can go on and on, but I don't want to waste your time.
Thank you.
So easy.
Okay, we'll take a question from there.
I have one question and one observation. Question is that to hear that system is connected sea level. Do we have any mapping at the country level about the specific interventions which are required? These biological interventions we talk about, if we don't have mapping where they have, they won't be possible. So that's my question.
The question is whether we have any mapping done on the interventions which are needed. Okay.
Answer is yes and no. We have an idea, but what you are pointing out is very important. We don't have a national plan for restoration. We have a national target, which is to increase our forest cover from 29 to 31%, which will require about 200,000, 300,000 hectares of restoration and reforestation. But where are we going to do? We have an idea, but it's not on a paper. So that's why I said the answer is yes and no.
Yeah, one more point to add to that. We have about 100 national plans. We don't have a holistic plan. So the wildlife department does its own thing. The forest department does its own thing. You saw that wonderful picture I showed you of the national physical plan, completely ignoring that along the coast there are the highest blue carbon ecosystems that absorb the most amount of carbon. Coast is for urbanization, according to that plan. So we do have plans, but they don't ever, there's no cooperation in preparing those plans.
Thank you. I think plan.
Yes, yeah, of course.
Technology of
I'd love to see one before I die.
Yeah. Okay. So I was saying that as conservationists, when I was listening to Devaka, he was saying that biosolutions take time. I think we as conservationists should stop saying this. Because it doesn't take time. If you look at humanity, 20, 30 years is a fraction of time. So 3-4 years mangrove regeneration is much better, much faster than building a engineering institution. So that's what my observation is.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping in here. There are also things called hybrid solutions, right? And one of the nicest things I've read, somewhere in the Philippines, there used to be people who harvested mussels for a living. And mussels make these banks inside bays and inlets, right? Huge. And all they go is they wade up there and they take the mussels and come. And one storm destroyed everything. So the livelihoods collapsed. So what they did was they just using the knowledge of how mussels reproduced, they put some floating bricks in a line across on the water. And you know that the larvae will come and deposit themselves on the brick. And they started building these banks again. They just needed a substrate. And after that, in 2 years' time, they removed the bricks. So there are lots of combinations possible to speed up things.
I have a.
Okay, this is just a small suggestion. So what you both have suggest and discuss about that protection and restorations, everything is perfect. But for the next time, I think if we can discuss about that moral obligations between this non-human content and the human. So it's I mean ethically that, and as environmental ethics in philosophically, so that's also a little important to understand those kind of things, right? So that's it's more suggestion. I think it's good, right? Yes, thank you very much for that. If you can.
May I ask? May I be allowed to make first a very brief suggestion, and secondly a little question, if I may. The suggestion is this extremely easy to understand and brilliantly illustrated lecture or talk should get through to the rest of the country on an urgent basis and to the leaders. Because climate, as we all know, climate crisis is far too serious and fast moving a thing to be ignored. And the only way is to communicate to engineers, to lawyers, to accountants. Everybody must know this. Otherwise, we cannot be on the same page at any discussion in government decision making, especially engineers. So I would plead that this be available, please, if you can, in the same form that you delivered it, with voice on, as well as the pictures, which are extremely clear, and a rare occasion that I understood something so clearly. Second is, my question, we are now going for mega development projects in every field. There's a huge city to come up. Then there are highways being built. Already we built a dam, which is about 150 miles long up to Hambantota. Now, I don't think all of it is on pillars, on pork pillars. So there are field areas which are very large. Aren't we, I would like to ask Dr. Devaka, isn't this causing greater stagnation of the heavy rainfall, of course, which falls? And is there a mapping done at any level by the survey department or anywhere where we can see before and after the stagnant water for 2-3 weeks? Thank you.
There is some mapping, but I think you're raising a very important question. When you build a highway across the landscape, it affects the drainage. But there has been some extensive studies by hydrologists to see what amount of drainage is necessary. But once the road is built, we have realized in some places the calculations were wrong, and we are seeing some parts of the highway being flooded. I think one of the issues, coming back to what you said, ideally elevated would have been the best solution, but it's about 4 times more expensive. So I think all the time we are looking at cost benefit, and people are going for the fill and build system, which is not going to help, because I think it has led to some serious flood events, not only in the Southern Expressway, but also in the Karnak Expressway. So you are raising a pertinent point. Some studies have been done about the flood. It can be done easily using GIS today. Satellite imagery, a time series analysis will tell us what was there before and what's after. And I've seen some postgraduate students doing their projects on this, but they're not available perhaps on the public space. That's probably why you have not seen it.
Professor, this recently the government has come up with the national policy on climate change, which I believe they are going to present to COP next week or on the 30th. How much of these nature-based solutions have they incorporated into that, or it's just not there at the moment at all?
No, are you referring to the biodiversity policy or climate, which is a fairly older policy?
No, the recently government published a new called the National Policy on Climate Change. That has come out about, they did the public consultations about a month ago, and it's been presented at the COP 2028, right?
Yeah.
COP 28 on 30th
yeah.
November.
Yes.
Has that got any of these measures into it, or it's completely ignored?
Again, I think the same question I think that gentleman also raised. We are talking about it, but we don't have a concise plan as to where the. Now, what I've shown you is there are a number of interventions that are possible, but that was on a very generic level. What we really need is a Sri Lankan plan as to where the nature-based solutions go and what kind of solutions, that kind of thing does not. Yeah.
There are, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 18 policies and about 128 to 138 strategies. But even in those, at those 118 policy levels also, is there anything specifically about nature-based solutions and this kind of a thing that needs to be done?
No, just a little. I think it is there in that plan, but again, what I said is we have a lot of plans. I was part of a. I have contributed to a lot of these, but the unfortunate thing is one is it's not implemented. We have National Biodiversity Plan, we have National Adaptation Plan, where all these things are listed. But it's one thing to have a plan and one thing to really get it going. So I think that's where we are failing to convert plans into action. It's not that we don't have things in plans, but it's just not happening, or the money is not available to carry it out.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I just had a small observation and then a question. I remember that, when you talk of ancient heritage and what we knew, the ancients appear to have had, not just us, but ancient civilizations, a kind of very profound visual mapping capacity, which allowed them to take extremely complex systems and to be able to then be very adaptive, whether it was just navigating seas or anything. I wonder whether our approach is a bit like the physicists and Einstein's theories, where we are stuck in certain kind of linear modeling systems for very, very complex, constantly changing, constant variables, where maybe the use of AI and other things, so you have national infrastructure plans and everything else that changes along the way, weather changes, people build things, highways happen, droughts happen, all sorts of things. So it's not a constant, and maybe a bird drops something and then we decide suddenly to go and grow some palm oil instead of something, or make a strategic decision related to uprooting our tea, which is not making money. And then the Americans come and tell us to grow eucalyptus or something. And then later UN tells us to grow mangroves and we give the wrong species of mangroves. And everything has reason for sometimes us to even be skeptical about even the expert opinions. Is there the use of AI or other methods that can also take very, very complex systems like this and input it and simulate model upon model upon model, so that every time there is one butterfly effect from a highway or, doing analog forestry instead of some other forestry or what have you, how do we manage it?
One thing I had to tell you about models, ma'am, it depends on understanding the right variables. There's a saying that you put garbage in, you get garbage out. And I don't think we understand some of these systems enough to model it. And if we try to model it with little understanding, we're probably going to come up with some erroneous results. So most of the time, what we try to do is adaptive learning. I mean, I'm involved in a reforestation project in Carnelia. First couple of years was very hard, but we learn and we fine tune it. Because we are so heavily depending on artificial intelligence, I think we are forgetting that human intelligence is equally important. We are not all that stupid. If we really think about it, we can come up with this kind of systems better, because we are able to see and adapt much rapidly, because if you are having that kind of system to constantly feed it in, if we know all the variables, maybe they can think faster than us. But on a platform where we understand very little, I think the best approach would be to adaptive. And if I think that the criticism you raised is pertinent, that sometimes the expert opinion may not be correct, but again, we are also giving our opinions based on what is known. So we don't know everything. I think that's very important for us to understand, because if we go around thinking we know everything, that would be the biggest mistake we can make. But we must strive to learn. That's what we do in a restoration project. We work with the project, try to understand what's going on and give adaptive measures until we reach the objective. So I think without artificial intelligence, we have done a lot of restoration this far. And to bring the point that you have started off by saying the traditional people didn't have any of this and they knew it. So I guess we can get along with the knowledge we have, and hopefully when we understand everything, we can bring the models.
Hi. So I think today, like if you really look at from a climate change point of view, two things that we have established is one, floods and droughts are sort of the two areas which affects the most for Sri Lanka. And so we sort of discussed solutions, and those were most to do with restoration at different zones, right? My question is, do we sort of have an understanding as to what our baseline should be? I was just curious because if you really look at probably the biggest type of change that this country underwent, I just thought about the plantation industry when during the colonization time, like how tea was started, and that's the biggest destruction that this country has sort of faced. So what was sort of our weather system, the monsoons, and what was it there before? How was it? Should that be the baseline, or what should be the baseline for Sri Lanka going forward? I think that's sort of my question.
When you talk about this, it's very difficult to think about a baseline, because we are talking in a constantly changing system. So the whole idea is not to restore us back to what was there in 1850, or because if you draw the baseline, where do you draw the line? Is it we go back 50 years, 1 million years? Because the planet is changing. It must, I think one thing we have to understand is change is inevitable. Change happens. That is what evolution is all about. It's about a changing planet. And we understand the drivers of change. But at the moment, what we are seeing is the human-driven changes are so rapid that systems cannot adapt. That's where we are trying to bring nature-based solutions, because nature provides us perhaps the best answer to this question, because these solutions can give us the kind of benefits that might help us to stall this. I don't think we can restore this back to 1850, or that is the objective. Because that is, you need a baseline only if you want to have a timeline as how far back as you want to go. So in this particular case, I think what we are trying to do is slow down the issue.
Yeah, and I really believe that we're not doing enough to look to the future. We're not doing any scenario modeling. I mean, we don't know enough, but we are not even attempting it. You know, they're doing it a lot for agriculture. I know that they do a lot. Am I right? For rice and all. Biodiversity, they've done some, but we tend to find fault with it, both of us. But you know, scenario, we we're not actually looking to the future. So when I see all those maps with the clusters on the coast of huge clusters of urban cities planned for the coast, I'm thinking, what are they thinking of? Yeah. I would rather shift the narrative to looking forward.
We have just one more question and we'll wind up with that. Yes.
Like the gentleman over there, I was thinking about the COP28 meeting coming up in 2 weeks' time. During the last few months, other countries have been publishing reports about what they have achieved during the last 2 years to show off their country at this COP28 meeting. For example, Kenya have planted 500,000 trees in the last 2 years. I think Vietnam, Myanmar have also planted a large number of trees over the last 3 or 4 years. Are you hopeful that Sri Lanka will also produce some kind of national report saying what it has done during the last 2 or 3 years? I know, just for one example, mangrove restoration was a huge headline 5 or 6 years ago. I remember a headline saying Sri Lanka leads the world in mangrove restoration. So are there any success stories and positive stories to highlight before COP28?
For COP28, I'm not sure what the government will present, but as for Sri Lanka, once upon a time after the tsunami declared all its mangroves protected immediately, and that made headlines. But when you go down and ask, can I have a map of the protected mangroves? It's how many years since the tsunami now? 20, 30 years? I still haven't got one, right? So it's a lot of rhetoric. And there was a study done in 2017 where they took a lot of mangrove restoration projects in Sri Lanka around the coast after the tsunami, and more than 75% had failed because of what Professor Devaka said. They were planted, the wrong species were planted in the wrong places at the wrong time and not looked after. There was no aftercare. So I do know that the Forest Department and the Wildlife Department are doing their own mangrove restoration projects. So I don't know whether that will be presented, but I believe that Sri Lanka leads the way in mangrove conservation is a misnomer. In the first place, our mangroves are nothing compared to the mangroves in other parts of the world. Our mangroves are not shoreline except in Miththapala, in the northwest part of the country, in Mannar. There is one patch of shoreline mangrove. That is, it faces the sea and it it protects the coast from the sea, from any extreme weather event. Most of our mangroves are fringing inside lagoons and estuaries. Tiny, tiny, tiny little patches. To the extent, for example, if you go to Putlam, a couple of decades ago, if I went to Putlam in January, there would be a mangrove patch. And if I went in March, that patch would not be there. It's just tiny patches gone, right? So, whereas when you have places like Vietnam, Myanmar, they are all shoreline mangroves and they have massive stands. I've been through mangroves in Thailand where the width of the river I went through is larger than the Mahavalley. So, and so miles and miles and miles of mangroves. So that definitely Sri Lanka leads the way in mangrove conservation is a misnomer.
Thank you, everyone. Just before we wind up, I call the editor of Lorries. I think most of you are familiar with this magazine, which has been in print for last 86 years. The good news is every single copy is now available online. And going forward, we'll be printing a very, very limited number. So most of you have, I think, already subscribed for the digital version of it. It's available on the website. Could I invite one of the contributors for this issue, Dr. Malik Fernando, to receive the first hard copy of the current edition? Sriyan? Sriyan is our new editor of the Lorries, so if any of you want to contribute for that magazine, please do contact him. Graham, could we have over here to present the token of appreciation? I think for the convenience of Dr. Sriyan, if you can walk up. Yes. Would you be able to come down, Doctor, or shall we come up? Okay, fine. Thank you, everyone.